This is a story about the extraordinary experiences of some New Zealand friends who, in a search for challenges and adventures, decided to journey into Africa. We were not explorers or experienced in expeditions to distant parts of the world, but we loved challenges and we were looking for new ones. To many, our experiences in driving through the Central Sahara, in battling across Central Africa, may not seem very adventurous. For us, though, and perhaps for ordinary people, they were extraordinary experiences of a lifetime. Our journey into Africa was in 2 stages. The first stage, over nearly 4 months, was into Morocco, down through the Central Sahara Desert, and then into Black Africa, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and then into the Ivory Coast, storing the vehicles there for our return 9 months later for the second stage, across Central Africa. And into Kenya and Tanzania, a journey which very nearly cost us our lives on more than one occasion. The 6 friends on the first stage were Murray Goff and his son Cameron, Lloyd Powell and his wife Julie. I'm Peter Travers and my son Hamish. We spent 12 months planning every conceivable detail. We purchased new Land Rovers in England, provisioning to cope for every eventuality we could think of. And we called ourselves New Zealand Expeditions. To give us best security, we had roof tents specially made for us in New Zealand. And we tested everything, even our cooker, which could boil water in what seemed like a matter of seconds only. And then finally, with a great deal of anticipation and apprehension, we set off from England, heading south down through France, briefly experiencing the wonders of Paris and the French countryside, and then attending to some final provisioning. We happily found our water containers had a much more important function. Into the Kingdom of Morocco. From Tangier, a route was to take us south down through Casablanca and Agadir, before turning east up through the high Atlas Mountains to the Algerian border at Figuig. Unloading from crossing the Straits of Gibraltar, and finally onto the continent of Africa. The Land Rovers were the latest turbo diesel models, strong and powerful for what lay ahead. We had special long-range fuel tanks fitted, and we carried more than 300 additional litres in our jerry cans. We had no desire to run out of fuel in the middle of the desert or in the depths of the jungles in Central Africa. Down through the alleyways and into the extraordinary marketplaces.
Because same size, they have same price. There is no difference of designs, you know?
Full of aromas, colour and raucous noise. While we originally believed the only available route south was down through the Western Desert, we found that the Algerian border had just reopened. And while the risks were greater, from Islamic terrorists and the desert bandits, the challenge of the Central Sahara was just too great for us to resist. And so we headed eastwards into the high Atlas Mountains towards the Algerian border. A memorable experience in itself, encountering the beggar children in this desolate part of the world, running barefoot over the rocks and shouting, "Kado, Kado," or "Give me a gift, give me a gift." And a Berber shepherd with his sheep and goats, and who had a touch of panache himself. Navigation was becoming an issue for us.
Well into sort of 5 or 6 o'clock just to get back to Tamanrasset again.
There were very few detailed maps available, and we had to constantly check our direction as best we could. There were early signs the weather was going to deteriorate in a big way. And this is just what happened. The worst rainstorm in North Africa for 25 years. But our Land Rovers were excellent, and they took the conditions in their stride. Although the resulting mud plains gave us some early practice in digging ourselves out of difficulty, something we were to encounter often in the time ahead. Into Algeria now, and a route that would take us down through the Sahara Desert to its geographic centre at Tamanrasset, to then head east towards the Libyan border to reach the prehistoric oasis of Jeannette, before turning south into Niger, and then at last heading into the Sahara to Beni Abbas, an oasis reminiscent of the Foreign Legion, where in the early hours of the morning we took to the massive and seemingly endless sand dunes of the Sahara Desert, to get our first experience with soft sand. To curse and swear, and then get serious with the sand ladders. This practice stood us in good stead as we headed deeper into the desert. For periods on hard piste, the hard-baked desert surface where we could travel at speed, although always with a watchful eye for soft sand drifts, which can cause havoc to time and to tempers. The piste is quite flat and totally featureless for what seemed like hundreds of miles, where tracks didn't exist and we had to rely totally on our compasses for direction. To get the direction even slightly wrong would lead us into a desert wilderness with little hope of return. It was hot and dirty work, and we took every opportunity to cool down and to clean off. Heading now for Tamanrasset, some 658 kilometers to go to reach the geographical center of the Sahara Desert. To reach the tomb of Moulay Hassan, a Muslim holy man who died here last century while on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and where it is a custom for all vehicles to drive around the tomb 3 times as a mark of respect and to ensure your own continuing safe passage. There are stories of those who didn't, and who did not survive. Needless to say, we circled the 3 times. From Tamanrasset, we headed northeast towards the Libyan border and the ancient oasis settlement of Jeannette. Although only some 750 kilometers distant and seemingly a comfortable 2-day drive, this was far from the case. The terrain was difficult to say the least. Tracks where they existed were strewn with boulders and washouts. A real challenge with some interesting interludes, including sharing our matches with a Berber and his camels in exchange for a photograph or 2. It was hard to imagine it could rain like this in the middle of the Sahara Desert. But there was much worse to come. At the village of Hirafok, beside what was now a raging torrent and getting worse as we watched. But next morning, to our surprise and delight, the torrent had almost disappeared, although leaving a lot of soft sand and mud behind, as we were to find out.
Okay, ça va.
But with much cursing and swearing, and some help from some friends, we're on our way again. Stopping at the village of Zortale and meeting with Ibrahim, chief of the Tuareg nomads in the region, who made us very welcome. With Ibrahim's blessing and confirmation that we were heading in the right direction, we raced across the piste again towards Jeanette. Pausing to share some of our water with some tanker drivers and encountering an array of rock formations that made you wonder as to the indeterminable age of the desert. Meeting with Laid, a Tuareg tribesman, who shared with us some prehistoric rock carvings, reputedly more than 10,000 years old. And this pre-Islamic rock tomb, which has stayed like this for more than 15 centuries. And then, to understand something of their way of life, we spent time with him and his friends in the desert. The Tuaregs live in encampments in the desert, using their camels to carry goods, often over vast distances. They are very distinctive people, very proud of their great influence in the desert, sadly much diminished now after tribal wars and terrible droughts. We climbed the high rock outcrops surrounding our camp to marvel at the panoramic views and the magnificent sunrises. Now into the ravines and canyons of the vast and elevated Tassili plateau. It was tough going, but well worth the effort to share in the rock carvings and paintings which are said to be tens of thousands of years old. Returning now to Tamanrasset, 3 or 4 days across the desert with only our compass to guide us the way. We had plotted satellite points coming to Jeanette, so, with a bit of luck, we could track these on the way back, or at least that was the theory of it. We had some interesting interludes, some rough patches, sub-zero temperatures in the early morning, and some golf practice in the biggest sand bunker you could ever imagine, to pause at the skeletons of other vehicles that didn't make it. And en route now into the Holga Mountains, with the shafts of rock making for the most impressive and inspiring sunrises. And then on again, finding our way as best we could down the river valleys and over some very rough terrain. Where at times some physical effort was required to keep us going. Back into the desert again and making good progress. Past Tamanrasset and navigating by compass, heading directly south for the Algerian-Niger border at Assamar.